Some questions were never meant to be answered, only to be asked. Tonight, let your mind drift through riddles that have puzzled the greatest thinkers for centuries, paradoxes with no solutions, mysteries that only deepen the more you explore. Don't worry about solving anything, just listen. Wonder. Let the questions do what they're meant to do, keep your curiosity awake, while the rest of you falls peacefully asleep. If every single part of a ship is replaced piece by piece, is it still the same ship? This ancient puzzle, known as the Ship of Theseus, was first posed by the Greek historian Plutarch. He told the story of a ship kept in honor of the hero Theseus. Over time, its wooden planks began to rot, so they were replaced one by one. Eventually, not a single original piece remained. The question, then, is simple, or perhaps not so simple. Is this still Theseus's ship? To make it even trickier, imagine this. What if someone gathered all the discarded original planks and rebuilt the ship elsewhere? Which one is the real ship of Theseus now? The one that holds the memory but none of the original parts, or the one made of the old wood but built anew? This riddle touches on a deeper question of identity and change. Are we defined by the parts that make us up, or by the continuity of our story? If your cells regenerate over the years, are you still the same person you were a decade ago? If your beliefs and thoughts have changed entirely, where does the real you live? You might feel the echo of this riddle in everyday life, in restored classic cars, rebuilt homes, or even in your relationships, as people change, but the bond remains. So ask yourself gently as you drift off tonight, what makes something or someone truly the same? If you remove one grain of sand from a heap, is it still a heap? At what point does it stop being one? This is the Sorites paradox, often called the paradox of the heap. The word Sorites comes from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. The riddle asks a simple but slippery question about how we define things that exist on a spectrum. Imagine a pile of sand. Clearly that's a heap. But if you take away just one grain of sand, surely it's still a heap, right? What about 2 grains? 3? 10? 100? At what exact moment does that collection of sand stop qualifying as a heap? The same logic applies to other vague concepts. How many hairs make someone bald? How much money counts as rich? When does a child become an adult? These are not black and white definitions. They are gray areas where the line is blurry, if it even exists at all. Philosophers use this paradox to explore the problem of vague predicates, words or categories that don't have precise boundaries. It reveals how often our thinking depends on fuzzy concepts that fall apart under close inspection. The paradox of the heap challenges the idea that everything can be defined sharply and cleanly. Sometimes there may be no exact tipping point, just gradual change unnoticed until it's too far gone to ignore. So as you listen and unwind, here's the quiet thought to carry with you. When does something truly become something else? And does it even matter where the line is, if the change is always happening one tiny step at a time? In a village, there's a barber who shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. So who shaves the barber? This clever little riddle comes from the mind of Bertrand Russell, one of the most influential philosophers and logicians of the 20th century. It's a playful but powerful example of a self-referential paradox, a logical loop that folds in on itself. Here's how it goes. Imagine a town where there is exactly one barber. The barber has a rule. He shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. If a man shaves himself, the barber leaves him alone. If he doesn't, the barber takes care of it. Now here's the twist. What about the barber himself? If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule he must not shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, the rule says he must shave himself. Either way, the situation loops back on itself, creating a contradiction. This paradox isn't just a quirky brain teaser. It highlights a deep problem in set theory and logic. It's closely related to Russell's paradox, which showed that certain ways of defining sets can lead to contradictions if we're not careful about self-reference. Beyond mathematics, the barber paradox speaks to everyday situations where rules fold back on the people who create or enforce them. Who polices the police? Who governs the government? Who questions the questioner? So tonight, as your mind drifts, consider softly. Can any rule truly stand outside the system it governs? Or does everything eventually circle back on itself? If Achilles gives a tortoise a head start in a race, how can he ever catch up? If every time he reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved a little farther ahead. This is one of the famous paradoxes of Zeno of Elea, a Greek philosopher from the 5th century BCE, who proposed several mind-bending riddles about motion, space, and time. The Achilles and the tortoise paradox is perhaps the most well-known. Here's how it works. Imagine Achilles, the swift Greek hero, challenges a slow-moving tortoise to a race, but generously allows the tortoise a small head start. Logic tells us Achilles should easily overtake the tortoise. But Zeno points out a strange problem. By the time Achilles reaches the spot where the tortoise began, the tortoise has moved slightly forward. When Achilles reaches that new spot, the tortoise has again inched ahead. And so on endlessly. The conclusion? Achilles must reach an infinite number of points where the tortoise once was before catching up, which seems impossible. Of course, modern mathematics resolves this paradox with the concept of converging infinite series, the idea that even infinite steps can add up to a finite distance. But Zeno wasn't really wrong. He was exposing something strange about how we understand motion and infinity. The riddle is not just about running. It asks us to reflect on how the continuous flow of time and space can be broken down into infinitely divisible moments, and whether doing so makes sense at all. So as you breathe deeply tonight, let the thought linger. Is the journey ever really about reaching the end, or simply crossing each step, one after another, forever? Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? This riddle, often called the omnipotence paradox, questions the very idea of unlimited power. If a being, say God, is truly all-powerful, could it create a task that even it could not accomplish? If so, then there is something it cannot do, lift the stone. But if it cannot create such a stone, then there is also something it cannot do, create the unliftable stone. Either way, the idea of being all-powerful seems to collapse under the weight of the question itself. This paradox has roots going back to medieval philosophy and theology. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas wrestled with the problem, trying to define divine power in a way that avoids logical contradictions. Some argue that omnipotence doesn't mean the power to do the logically impossible, such as creating square circles or married bachelors. In this view, the question is nonsense, like asking if someone can make blue heavier than fast. But even that response doesn't completely dissolve the puzzle. The paradox still invites us to ask, what does it really mean to be powerful? Does true power require the ability to defy logic, or the wisdom to work within its boundaries? You might feel echoes of this question in everyday life when facing impossible choices, or when strength alone can't solve the problem at hand. So tonight, as you relax and let your thoughts drift, hold this gentle wonder. Is power about doing anything at all, or knowing what cannot, and perhaps should not, be done? If you traveled back in time and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, would you still exist, to go back in time at all? The grandfather paradox is one of the most famous time travel riddles, often used in discussions of causality, logic, and the nature of time itself. First appearing in science fiction in the early 20th century, this thought experiment asks us to imagine what happens when actions in the past directly contradict the conditions needed for those actions to occur. Here's the setup. Suppose you invent a time machine. Driven by curiosity or perhaps darker motives, you go back in time to a moment before your grandfather met your grandmother, and you prevent their meeting, or worse, eliminate your grandfather entirely. Now the paradox arises. If your grandfather never fathers your parent, and therefore you are never born, who then traveled back to interfere? If you're never born, you couldn't have gone back. But if you did go back, then clearly you were born. This loop of contradiction ties itself into a knot of logic that seems impossible to untangle. Some theories, like the many worlds interpretation, suggest that perhaps your actions create a separate timeline, an alternate universe where events play out differently, leaving your own timeline intact. Others propose the idea of self-consistency. The universe will somehow prevent you from creating these contradictions, no matter what you try. But at its heart, the grandfather paradox reminds us of how fragile the chain of cause and effect really is, and how little we may understand about time, free will, and the consequences of our choices. So as you rest tonight, let this quiet question hover. If you could change the past, would the past change you first? Does seeing a green apple somehow prove that all ravens are black? This curious thought experiment is known as Hempel's paradox, or the paradox of the ravens, proposed by German philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel in the 1940s. It explores a strange twist in how we think about evidence and confirmation. Here's the setup. The statement "all ravens are black" is logically equivalent to "everything that is not black is not a raven." It's a simple logical rule called contraposition. So if you see a black raven, that seems to support the statement. But here's where it gets weird. If you see a green apple, that's also something that is not black and not a raven. Therefore, technically, it confirms the statement too. This paradox challenges the way we understand confirmation theory, the idea of how evidence supports a general statement. Intuitively, we feel that seeing more black ravens should strengthen our belief that all ravens are black. But the logic suggests that observing any non-black non-raven should count as evidence too, even if it feels irrelevant. Philosophers and scientists have debated whether this really makes sense. Some argue that while the logic holds, the weight of confirmation is not equal. A green apple confirms the claim only trivially, while a black raven confirms it directly. This riddle nudges us toward a deeper question about evidence itself: what truly counts as proof, and how much of what we believe comes from logic versus intuition. So tonight, as you breathe slowly and let your thoughts wander, consider this gentle puzzle. How often do we find evidence where we're not even looking for it? If someone says, "I am lying," are they telling the truth or lying? This classic brain twister is known as the liar paradox, and it has puzzled thinkers for thousands of years. The earliest known version comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Epimenides of Crete, who famously declared, "All Cretans are liars." If he was telling the truth, then, as a Cretan himself, he must also be lying. But the simplest and most famous version is the sentence, "This statement is false, and think about it." If the statement is true, then what it says must hold, meaning it is false. But if it is false, then it is not the case that it is false, so it must be true. Either way, the statement loops back on itself in a cycle of contradiction. This paradox isn't just a fun puzzle. It strikes at the heart of logic and language. It shows how self-reference, when not handled carefully, can break the rules of reasoning. Modern logicians have wrestled with this by developing special logical systems that either avoid self-referential statements or classify them as undefined. In daily life, echoes of the liar paradox show up whenever we catch ourselves in statements like, "I always lie," or "ignore everything I say." These phrases collapse under their own weight, forcing us to question how we define truth at all. So as your mind softens into rest tonight, consider this gentle puzzle. What happens when truth turns back on itself? And is it possible that some questions just shouldn't be asked? If one twin travels near the speed of light and returns, why is the traveler younger than the twin who stayed behind? This is the twin paradox, a famous thought experiment from the world of Einstein's theory of relativity. Unlike many other paradoxes, this one isn't about a logical contradiction. It's about how time itself behaves under the strange laws of physics. Here's how it goes. Imagine two identical twins. One stays on Earth, the other boards a spaceship and travels close to the speed of light for what feels like a short journey, then returns home. But when they meet again, the traveling twin is noticeably younger than the one who stayed. How is this possible? The answer lies in time dilation, a key prediction of Einstein's special relativity. At speeds approaching light, time moves more slowly for the person who is moving fast, compared to someone who is stationary. To the twin on the ship, only a few years might have passed. But back on Earth, decades could have gone by. It feels like science fiction, but it has real scientific grounding. Experiments with atomic clocks on fast-moving jets have confirmed this effect on small scales. The faster you move, the slower your clock ticks relative to someone at rest. The paradox isn't that the math doesn't work. It's that the results defy our everyday sense of time as steady and universal. It challenges the idea that time moves the same for everyone, everywhere. So as you drift toward sleep tonight, let this thought float softly through your mind. Is time something we travel through, or does time itself travel differently for each of us? Does having more choices really make us happier, or does it make decisions harder? This modern philosophical riddle, often discussed by psychologist Barry Schwartz, explores the idea that while freedom of choice seems like the ultimate good, too much choice can lead to confusion, anxiety, and regret. It's known as the paradox of choice. Imagine standing in front of a shelf stocked with 50 different kinds of jam. On the surface, this feels empowering. So many options, so much freedom. But research shows that when faced with too many options, people often feel overwhelmed. Instead of feeling satisfied, they become stressed about making the right decision. And even after choosing, they're more likely to feel regret, wondering if one of the other options might have been better. In contrast, when the same shoppers were offered just 6 choices of jam, not only were they more likely to make a purchase, they also reported being happier with their decision. This paradox touches on something deep about human psychology: the fear of missing out, the burden of responsibility for our choices, and the illusion that more options always equal better outcomes. You can feel the echo of this paradox in daily life, scrolling through endless movie options, trying to pick the perfect vacation spot, or simply choosing what to eat for dinner. So as you settle into rest tonight, here's a soft question to ponder. Is true freedom found in having endless options, or in learning to be content with the few we have? If a donkey stands exactly midway between 2 identical piles of hay, unable to choose one over the other, will it starve to death? This riddle is known as Buridan's donkey, named after the French philosopher John Buridan, though the idea traces back to even earlier discussions of free will and decision-making. Picture a hungry donkey standing perfectly between 2 piles of hay. Both piles are equally delicious, equally distant, and there's no reason to prefer one over the other. The donkey, trapped by indecision, cannot make a choice, and so, despite being surrounded by abundance, it starves. While this might sound like a silly cartoon scenario, the riddle raises profound questions about rational choice, free will, and determinism. If decisions are made purely by logical reasoning, and if no factor tips the scales one way or another, how does choice even happen? Does the ability to act require some spark of irrationality or something beyond pure logic? Philosophers use this thought experiment to illustrate the problem of making decisions when faced with 2 or more perfectly balanced options. It also highlights how in real life, even small differences, emotional bias, habit, instinct, may play a vital role in breaking a deadlock. You might feel this paradox in daily moments of hesitation, picking between 2 meals, 2 movies, 2 paths. And while the stakes aren't life or death, the feeling of being stuck between equal choices is deeply human. So as you ease into quiet tonight, let this question drift softly through your thoughts. Is indecision the real danger, or is it the belief that all choices must be perfectly justified? If a prisoner is told he will be hanged unexpectedly next week, but he figures out the day in advance, will the execution still be a surprise? This is known as the unexpected hanging paradox, a riddle about prediction, logic, and surprise that has puzzled philosophers and logicians alike. Here's how it goes. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one day next week, but the exact day will be a surprise to you. You won't know which day it is until the executioner knocks on your door." The prisoner thinks carefully. He reasons that the hanging cannot happen on Friday, because if he's still alive by Thursday night, then Friday wouldn't be a surprise. But if Friday is ruled out, then the last possible day is Thursday. And if he's still alive on Wednesday night, then Thursday also wouldn't be a surprise. Following this logic, he rules out Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday as well. Confident that the hanging can't happen at all, the prisoner relaxes. But then on Wednesday, unexpectedly, the executioner arrives. The paradox lies in the loop between expectation and surprise. The prisoner's logical reasoning seems sound, but it leads to a false conclusion. The unexpected outcome happens precisely because he convinced himself it couldn't. This riddle challenges the idea that logical deduction always leads to certainty, especially when knowledge about knowledge comes into play. So as your thoughts drift tonight, consider softly, is a surprise only a surprise if you never see it coming, or does the act of expecting the unexpected keep the mystery alive? If you travel back in time and give Shakespeare a copy of his own plays, who really wrote them? This is the bootstrap paradox, a time travel puzzle that challenges the very idea of creation and origin. It asks, what happens when something exists without a clear point of invention? When the cause of something loops back and becomes its own effect? Imagine this scenario. You have a time machine. You love Shakespeare's works, so you decide to travel back in time with a complete copy of his plays. When you meet Shakespeare, you hand him the book. Fascinated, he copies them down, and those very works become the famous Shakespearean plays we know today. But here's the problem. Where did the plays originally come from? You got them from Shakespeare, but Shakespeare got them from you. There's no clear starting point. The information exists in a closed loop, with no true creator. The paradox appears in many science fiction stories. Think of a scientist who invents a time machine because they found its blueprints sent back from the future. The invention seems to come from nowhere. The bootstrap paradox raises questions about authorship, originality, and causality. It suggests that some things might exist in time without an origin, challenging the very idea that everything must have a beginning. So as you gently drift tonight, here's the question to let float through your thoughts. If something has no clear origin, does it still truly exist? Or does the story itself become the source? Why is water essential for life, often cheaper than diamonds, which are mostly useless? This riddle is known as the paradox of value, or sometimes the diamond-water paradox, a concept that dates back to the philosopher Adam Smith, one of the founders of modern economics. Consider this. Water is crucial for survival. Without it, life simply cannot exist. Diamonds, on the other hand, while beautiful, are not necessary for survival at all. Yet diamonds are vastly more expensive than water. Why? The answer lies in the difference between total value and marginal value. Water is abundant in most places, so much so that the next glass of water often holds very little extra value to someone who already has enough. Diamonds, however, are rare. Their scarcity makes each additional diamond much more valuable, even if they serve little practical purpose. This distinction gave rise to a key principle in economics: marginal utility. The idea that the value of something is determined not by how much we need it overall, but by how much we desire one more unit of it. You might feel the echoes of this paradox in daily choices. Why luxury goods often carry higher prices than essentials, or why things we take for granted may hold the greatest real worth. So as you breathe quietly tonight, let this thought rest softly with you. Do we value things for what they truly are, or for how rare they seem to be? Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? This thought-provoking riddle comes from philosopher Karl Popper, who introduced the paradox of tolerance in his work The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945. At first glance, it seems simple. A tolerant society should be open-minded and accept all viewpoints, even those it disagrees with. But here's the catch. What happens if a society tolerates ideas and movements that are themselves intolerant, that seek to suppress, harm, or eliminate the freedom of others? If left unchecked, such intolerant forces could grow strong enough to destroy the very freedom and openness that allowed them to exist. Popper argued that unlimited tolerance can lead to the disappearance of tolerance altogether. In his view, a tolerant society must reserve the right not to tolerate the intolerant, especially when those groups refuse to engage in rational discussion and instead use violence or coercion. This paradox pushes us into difficult moral territory, balancing freedom of speech with the need to protect that freedom from those who would abuse it. Where should the line be drawn, and who decides when intolerance has crossed the line? It's a question that echoes loudly in debates about censorship, hate speech, and the limits of free expression. So as your thoughts slow down tonight, here's the soft question to carry with you. Does true tolerance mean accepting everything, or knowing when to stand firm against what would destroy it? If a teacher only gets paid when the student wins their first case, what happens if the student never takes a case to court? This is the paradox of the court, also known as the Protagoras paradox, named after the ancient Greek sophist Protagoras. The riddle revolves around a legal contract between Protagoras and his student, Euathlus. The deal was simple. Euathlus would pay his teacher for legal training, but only after winning his first court case. However, after finishing his studies, Euathlus chose not to take any cases to court. Frustrated, Protagoras decided to sue him, reasoning, "If I win this lawsuit, the court orders him to pay me. If he wins, he has won his first case, and therefore owes me according to our agreement." But Euathlus had his own defense. "If I win, the court has ruled I don't owe him anything. If I lose, I still haven't won my first case, so according to our agreement, I still owe him nothing." Each argument seems airtight, yet they directly contradict each other. The paradox challenges our assumptions about contracts, logic, and legal fairness. It reveals how rules can entangle themselves when cause and consequence become circular, and it raises deeper questions about how justice should be applied when agreements depend on future outcomes that may never happen. So as your mind rests tonight, here's the gentle thought to ponder. When agreement depends on what has not yet happened, what happens if it never does? If Sleeping Beauty is awakened once during a week-long experiment, but doesn't know which day it is, what are the chances it's Monday when she wakes up? This is the Sleeping Beauty paradox, a thought experiment in probability theory and self-locating belief. It was first posed by philosopher Adam Elgar in 2000, though it builds on earlier puzzles in epistemology. Here's how it goes. Sleeping Beauty volunteers for an experiment. On Sunday, she is put to sleep. A fair coin is flipped. If it lands heads, she is awakened once on Monday. If it lands tails, she is awakened twice, once on Monday and again on Tuesday. But after the first awakening, she is put back to sleep with no memory of it. Each time Sleeping Beauty wakes up, she does not know what day it is or how the coin landed. Now the question, when she wakes up, what probability should she assign to the coin having landed heads? There are two camps. Halfers argue the chance is still 50%, because the coin toss remains fair and unchanged. Thirders argue the chance is now 1-3, because there are three possible awakening events: Monday heads, Monday tails, Tuesday tails, and only one of those is heads. The debate remains unresolved. This paradox pushes us to question how knowledge, memory, and probability interact, and whether forgetting changes the odds. So as your thoughts slow down tonight, here's the soft puzzle to hold. Does not knowing change the truth, or just the way we count the possibilities? If you're on a game show and offered the chance to switch doors after one is revealed, should you switch or stay? This is the famous Monty Hall problem, named after the host of the classic game show Let's Make a Deal. It's one of the most counterintuitive riddles in probability, one that even mathematicians debated when it first gained attention. Here's how it works. You're on a game show. There are 3 doors. Behind one is a car, the prize you want. Behind the other 2 are goats. You pick a door, say door 1. The host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens another door, say door number 3, revealing a goat. He then asks, do you want to stick with your original choice or switch to door number 2? Most people assume it doesn't matter, thinking it's now a 50-50 chance between the 2 remaining doors. But probability says otherwise. If you stick, your chance of winning remains at 1-3 because that was the initial chance your chosen door had the car. If you switch, your chance jumps to 2-3 times because the host's action of revealing a goat changes the game. The host's choice is not random. He always reveals a goat. That makes the unopened door more likely to be the winner. The Monty Hall problem is a brilliant example of how intuition and probability don't always align. It teaches us how new information reshapes odds, even when the setup feels simple. So as your thoughts settle tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. In the game of life, how often do we stay put, thinking the odds haven't changed, when in fact they have? If you're given 2 envelopes, one containing twice as much money as the other, should you switch after choosing one? This is the 2 envelopes paradox, a classic riddle in probability and decision theory that seems to defy logic at first glance. Here's how it works. You are presented with 2 envelopes, each containing some amount of money. One envelope has twice the amount of the other, but you don't know which is which. Let's say you pick envelope A. You're then given the chance to switch to envelope B. Your reasoning might go like this. If the envelope you chose happens to hold X dollars, then the other envelope must contain either twice that amount, if your envelope is the smaller one, or half that amount, if yours is the larger. Now let's think about what that means for your odds. There's a 50% chance that switching would double your money, and a 50% chance that switching would cut it in half. When you calculate the average outcome, the so-called expected value, switching seems to offer you more. The math suggests that on average, the other envelope could be worth about 1.25 times what you're holding right now. It feels like a clear invitation to switch, but is it really? But here's the problem. If this logic were true, you'd always want to switch even after switching, and then switch back, and then switch again, forever trapped in indecision. The paradox arises because expected value calculations depend on the distribution of possible amounts in the envelopes, which isn't clearly defined in the setup. Without a real upper limit or context for how the amounts were chosen, the math misleads you into thinking there's always an advantage. This riddle invites us to explore the limits of probability theory when applied to infinite or undefined situations, and reminds us that sometimes knowing less about the setup makes our choices less rational than we think. So as you drift gently tonight, let this soft question remain. When the math says always switch ends but the setup has no end, should you trust the math or trust your gut? In a town where the barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves, who shaves the barber? We've met this riddle earlier, the classic barber paradox first posed by philosopher and logician Bertrand Russell. But now let's take a deeper breath and look at it again through the lens of self-reference. Here's the setup once more. In a village, there is exactly one barber. His rule is simple. He shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. If a man shaves himself, the barber leaves him alone. If he doesn't, the barber takes care of it. Then comes the trouble. Does the barber shave himself? If he does, he should not, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he doesn't, then by his own rule he must shave himself. Either way, the rule creates a contradiction. The problem isn't with the barber himself, it's with the definition of the system. This paradox was so influential that it helped Russell uncover fundamental problems in set theory, where similar self-referencing definitions caused logical loops. His work gave birth to modern logic and the development of systems that avoid these kinds of contradictions. The riddle is not just about a barber, it's about the danger of self-reference without boundaries. It asks us, can a rule apply to itself without breaking? And what happens when systems try to govern themselves from inside? As your eyes begin to close tonight, here's the soft reflection to hold. When the rule applies to the ruler, can the loop ever stay closed? If you believe each lottery ticket is unlikely to win, can you still believe that one ticket must win? This is the lottery paradox, introduced by philosopher Henry Kaiberg in the 1960s. It reveals a strange tension between reasonable belief and logical certainty. Here's how the puzzle unfolds. Imagine there's a lottery with 1 million tickets, and you know exactly one ticket will win. It seems entirely reasonable to look at any single ticket and say, this ticket probably won't win. In fact, it feels reasonable to say that about every individual ticket. But here's the problem. If you believe that none of the tickets will win, then you are directly contradicting the fact that one of them must. Each belief that ticket number 1 probably won't win, that ticket number 2 probably won't win, and so on, seems justified on its own. But taken together, these beliefs become impossible. This paradox challenges our understanding of rational belief systems. It asks, can we hold many individually reasonable beliefs that together form an unreasonable whole? The lottery paradox speaks to broader issues of probability, epistemology, and decision-making. It's not just about lotteries, it's about how we handle uncertainty and how beliefs stack up when probabilities are involved. So as your thoughts quiet down tonight, here's the question to carry softly with you. When the odds say almost impossible, but logic says one must succeed, which truth do you trust? If Socrates promises to tell the truth but says, you will cross this bridge only if I first say something false, can he ever cross? This is known as Buridan's bridge paradox, credited to the medieval philosopher John Buridan, though the roots of the idea go back as far as ancient logic puzzles. Here's the scene. Socrates stands before a tyrant trying to cross a bridge. The tyrant declares, if what you say is true, I will let you pass. But if you lie, I will throw you into the water. Socrates then makes his move. You will throw me into the water. Now the tyrant faces a dilemma. If Socrates' statement is true, the tyrant must let him cross, because the rule is to throw him into the water only if he lies. But if Socrates is thrown into the water, then what he said was true, meaning he shouldn't have been thrown at all. This paradox is a cousin of the liar paradox, a twist of logic that traps itself in a loop between truth and falsehood. It challenges how we think about self-reference and conditional statements. More than just a riddle, the bridge paradox asks us to consider, can rules based on truth or falsehood ever handle statements that predict their own outcome? So tonight, as your mind rests easy, let this quiet question remain. When truth depends on what happens next, can anyone really keep their promise? How can there be just as many square numbers as there are natural numbers when squares seem so much rarer? This is known as Galileo's paradox of infinity, proposed by Galileo Galilei in the 17th century. It reveals the strange and beautiful world of infinite sets, where the rules of counting defy our everyday expectations. Here's the puzzle. Consider the list of natural numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now consider the list of their perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100. At first glance, the square numbers seem like a smaller subset of the natural numbers. After all, not every number is a perfect square. But now pair each natural number with its square. 1 with 1, 2 with 4, 3 with 9, 4 with 16, and so on. For every number n, there's exactly one square n2. The pairing continues forever, perfectly matched, despite the fact that squares feel less frequent. Galileo noticed this and concluded that the usual rules of greater and smaller don't apply to infinite sets the way they do to finite ones. Later, mathematician Georg Cantor would formalize this concept, showing that infinite sets can have the same cardinality, a measure of size for infinite groups, even when one seems contained within the other. So as your thoughts soften tonight, here's the gentle wonder to hold. When infinity is endless on both sides, can more and less even make sense? If the jester always tells jokes that are not funny, but one day he tells a joke about how none of his jokes are funny and you laugh, was he telling the truth or lying? This playful paradox, sometimes called the jester's paradox, is a cousin of the liar paradox, but with a twist of humor and human perception. The jester in the king's court has a reputation. None of his jokes are ever funny. People roll their eyes, groan, and sigh whenever he performs. But one day, standing before the crowd, the jester declares, "The only joke I know is that none of my jokes are funny." And, unexpectedly, the crowd bursts into laughter. But here's the catch. If the audience laughed, wasn't the joke funny? If the joke was funny, then the jester's statement that none of his jokes are funny is false. But if it was false, then he did just what he said he couldn't do. This paradox gently tugs at the boundary between truth, perception, and irony. It asks, is something funny because of the words themselves or because of how we respond? And it touches on deeper questions of self-reference. What happens when a statement talks about itself, and then reality changes around it? So as your mind relaxes tonight, here's the playful puzzle to ponder. Is truth in the telling or in the laughing? If a crocodile steals your child and promises to return the child, only if you correctly predict what the crocodile will do, what should you say? This ancient brain teaser, known as the crocodile paradox, is one of the earliest examples of self-referential puzzles, and it dances between logic, language, and cruelty. Here's how it goes. A crocodile has taken a child and offers the parent a grim deal. I will return your child if, and only if, you correctly predict what I will do next. The desperate parent could respond in many ways, but suppose they say, you will not return my child. Now the crocodile faces a logical dilemma. If the crocodile does not return the child, then the parent's prediction was correct, which means the crocodile should have returned the child. But if the crocodile returns the child, then the parent's prediction was incorrect. So, by the crocodile's rule, the child should not be returned. Whichever choice the crocodile makes, it seems to contradict the terms of the deal. This paradox is not just a cruel riddle. It highlights the problems that arise when rules refer to themselves. Much like the liar paradox or the barber paradox, it shows how simple logic can twist itself into impossible knots when self-reference enters the equation. So as your thoughts settle tonight, here's the quiet question to hold. When a promise depends on the prediction of its own outcome, can anyone truly keep their word? If winning the lottery brings happiness, why do so many winners regret it? This riddle, often referred to as the winner's curse, dives into the unexpected outcomes of getting exactly what we want, and how that sometimes leads not to joy, but to disappointment. Imagine the dream. You buy a lottery ticket and against impossible odds you win a fortune. The world opens up. Every door seems unlocked. Freedom, security, happiness all at once. But in reality, many lottery winners report higher stress, broken relationships, anxiety, and loneliness. Some even say they were happier before they won. How can that be? Psychologists suggest a few reasons. Sudden wealth can disrupt your identity, changing how you see yourself and how others see you. Money may isolate you from friends and family, creating suspicion or resentment. The dream of winning can be more powerful than the reality. Once the goal is reached, the journey that gave life meaning is gone. This paradox is a reflection of the difference between anticipated happiness and experienced happiness. What we expect to make us happy doesn't always align with what actually does. So as your thoughts slow down tonight, here's the soft question to rest on. Is the greatest prize always what we wanted, or sometimes just the chase itself? If the zookeeper feeds the animals only when they are hungry, but the animals show hunger only when they expect to be fed, how can the zookeeper ever know when to feed them? This playful yet puzzling riddle, sometimes referred to as the zookeeper's dilemma, explores the tension between cause and expectation, where the signal for an action depends entirely on the expectation of that action occurring. Here's the setup. The zookeeper has a rule. I will feed the animals only when they are hungry. But the animals, being clever and observant, have learned something. The zookeeper feeds us only when we act hungry. So the animals begin to look hungry only when they expect food, regardless of whether they actually need it. Now the problem arises. How can the zookeeper tell the difference between genuine hunger and performative hunger? If the only sign of hunger is the animal's behavior, and that behavior is motivated by the expectation of being fed, the cycle spins into uncertainty. This riddle echoes deeper questions in philosophy, economics, and psychology about how signals and actions can become entangled and how trust or manipulation can shape behavior. So as your thoughts drift softly tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. When actions depend on expectations, how can you tell what's real from what's just performed? If the apprentice casts a spell to make the broom fetch water endlessly, but forgets how to stop it, who is really in control? The apprentice or the spell? This classic riddle comes from the old German tale, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, popularized by Goethe's poem and later by Disney's Fantasia. But beneath the story's charm lies a deeper philosophical paradox about control, power, and unintended consequences. Here's the scenario. The apprentice, eager to impress, uses magic to command a broom to carry water. The spell works perfectly. The broom obeys. Over and over it brings more and more water, just as ordered. But the apprentice has a problem. He doesn't know how to undo the spell. Soon the room begins to flood. The apprentice tries to break the broom in half, but each piece becomes another broom, now doubling the chaos. What started as a clever use of power turns into a runaway disaster. The question at the heart of this riddle is simple. When you set something in motion that you can't stop, do you still control it at all? This paradox echoes through modern dilemmas, from technology outpacing regulation, to AI systems acting beyond human understanding, to economic policies with ripple effects no one predicted. So as your thoughts soften into quiet tonight, here's the gentle reflection to hold. Is control the power to start, or the wisdom to know how and when to stop? If there's a book that contains the true answer to every question, can you trust what it says about itself? This riddle, often called the omniscient book paradox, plays with the ideas of truth, authority, and self-reference. Imagine such a book exists. Every question you ask, every doubt you have, it provides the correct answer. Whether it's about history, science, love, or philosophy, the book always speaks the truth. One day, curious about its perfection, you ask the book, "Is every statement in this book true?" And the book responds, "No." Now the puzzle begins. If the book says that not every statement within it is true, then how can you trust anything else it says, including that very claim? But if it's lying about that, then perhaps every statement actually is true, which means the claim that it contains falsehoods is itself false, and round we go. This riddle shares DNA with the liar paradox, but adds the extra weight of ultimate authority, the very idea that one source can hold unquestionable truth. It asks us to consider, is truth stable when the source questions itself? And what happens when the answer to whether you should trust something comes from the thing you're questioning? So as your mind rests tonight, here's the soft wonder to drift on. Can absolute certainty ever include doubt, or does doubt always undo it? If the teacher announces that there will be a surprise exam next week, and the students will not know the day of the exam until the morning it happens. Can the exam truly be a surprise? This is the unexpected exam paradox, sometimes called the surprise test paradox, a riddle about expectation, logic, and self-defeating predictions. Here's the setup. A teacher tells the class there will be an exam next week. It will be a surprise. You won't know which day until the exam happens. The students begin to reason. The exam can't be on Friday, because if it hasn't happened by Thursday, they'll expect it on Friday, so it wouldn't be a surprise. But if Friday is ruled out, then Thursday becomes the last possible day, and so on backward through the week. By this reasoning, the students conclude that a surprise exam is impossible. But then, say on Wednesday, the teacher walks in and announces the test, and the students are genuinely surprised. The paradox lies in the loop between expectation and surprise. The logical argument seems airtight, yet the actual experience of surprise still happens. It asks us to reflect, does reasoning about surprise actually prevent it? Or is surprise something that defies logic the moment we experience it? So as your thoughts settle tonight, here's the gentle puzzle to hold. Can true surprise survive when logic tries to predict it away? If an author believes everything written in their book is true, but also admits that there are likely mistakes somewhere inside, can both beliefs be reasonable at once? This is known as the preface paradox, introduced by philosopher David Mackinson. It explores a tension between confidence in each individual claim and reasonable doubt about the whole. Here's the situation. An author spends years researching and writing a book, carefully checking every fact, every argument, every conclusion. For each statement, the author fully believes it to be true. Otherwise, they wouldn't have included it. But in the book's preface, the author writes honestly, "Despite my best efforts, there are probably some mistakes in this book." At first, this seems like a contradiction. How can the author both believe that every statement is true and also believe that there is at least one false statement? Yet it feels reasonable. Human experience tells us that in complex works, errors are common, even when each part seems solid on its own. This paradox brings to light the difference between local certainty, confidence in specific statements, and global uncertainty, awareness of the possibility of mistakes across the whole. It echoes challenges in science, journalism, and philosophy, where we strive for truth, yet remain humble enough to admit fallibility. So as your thoughts soften tonight, here's the quiet question to carry with you. Can certainty and doubt live together, not as enemies, but as companions in the search for truth? If you have to reach a destination by first going halfway, then half of the remaining distance, then half again, will you ever truly arrive? This is another of Zeno's famous paradoxes, called the dichotomy paradox, and it invites us to reflect on how we experience space, time, and progress. Here's the scenario. Imagine you're walking toward a finish line. But before you can get there, you must first cover half the distance. Then, you must cross half of the remaining distance. After that, again half of what remains, and so on forever. With each step you get closer, but there's always another halfway point to cross. The logic seems to suggest that motion is impossible because the journey breaks down into an infinite number of steps. Yet in the real world you do arrive. People cross rooms, run marathons, fly across oceans. So where does the paradox go wrong? The answer lies in the mathematics of infinite series. Even though there are an infinite number of halves to cross, the sum of these halves converges to a finite number. In the case of traveling a single unit of distance, 1, 2, plus 1, 4, plus 1, 8, plus 1, 16, 1. But the riddle remains profound because it challenges our basic assumptions about how things happen. It asks us to consider whether infinity is a barrier or simply a way of thinking. So as your thoughts soften tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. When progress breaks into endless steps, is the journey ever really done? What happens when a sentence describes itself and nothing else? This is known as the Quine paradox, named after the philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine. It plays with the idea of self-reference without contradiction, different from the liar paradox, where a statement like, "This sentence is false," creates a loop of truth and falsehood. The Quine sentence avoids contradiction by being purely descriptive of itself. For example, this sentence contains 5 words. When you read that sentence, you can count the words and confirm that it's true. No paradox, no contradiction, just self-reference that works. But here's where the riddle becomes fascinating. If you can describe a sentence perfectly from the inside, does it make the sentence a kind of mirror? A sentence that only exists to talk about itself? What if the sentence said, "This sentence is written in English, true again"? But it could also say, "This sentence has 13 letters. Check the letters, mouse, and you'll know whether it speaks the truth." The Quine paradox isn't just a linguistic trick. It asks us to reflect on the nature of meaning, truth, and reference. When something refers only to itself, is it saying anything meaningful about the world? Or does it collapse into a closed circle of description? So as your thoughts drift into calm tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. When the words talk only about themselves, are they revealing truth or just playing with reflection? If the circumstances of your birth, where, when, to whom, are purely a matter of chance, how much of your life is really your own making? This philosophical riddle, often referred to as the lottery of birth, challenges our ideas of merit, fairness, and free will. Consider this. No one chooses the country they're born into, the economic status of their parents, their genetics, or the era in which they are born. These starting conditions shape access to education, healthcare, safety, opportunities, everything that seems to define a person's chances of success or failure. Two people could work equally hard, have similar talents, and make the same efforts, yet their lives may turn out completely different because of the circumstances they began with. This riddle raises uncomfortable questions about how much control we truly have over our lives and how much is shaped by luck before we ever make a single choice. It also touches on moral and political debates. Should we correct for the randomness of birth through systems like redistribution or social support? Or is the randomness itself an unavoidable part of life's fabric? But more than just political, the paradox asks a personal question. When you look at your life, how much credit or blame can you honestly claim if the starting point was never yours to choose? So as your thoughts quiet tonight, here's the soft reflection to hold. If life is a lottery, does winning or losing say anything about who we are, or only where we began? If two things are absolutely identical in every possible way, are they still two things or just one? This thought experiment, known as the identity of indiscernibles, comes from the 17th century philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. It poses a deceptively simple question about identity and existence. The principle suggests, if there is no possible way to tell two things apart, not by position, appearance, history, or behavior, then they aren't truly two things at all. They are one and the same. Here's a playful example. Imagine two spheres floating in space with no marks, no labels, no distinguishing features. Identical in every way. Even their location is undetectably different because space itself has no landmarks. If there's no difference you could ever discover between them, are there really two spheres? Or is the idea of two based purely on how we talk about them, not on anything real about the spheres themselves? This riddle presses us to ask, what does it mean to be distinct? Is identity tied to features we can perceive, or is it something deeper, even when nothing can be observed? The paradox challenges not just philosophy, but also quantum physics, where particles can be truly indistinguishable and yet still treated as separate in calculations. So as your mind rests tonight, here's the gentle puzzle to hold. If there's no difference at all, is there even still a difference to count? If a message is never sent, but the expectation of it changes the behavior of the receiver, did the message still communicate something? Imagine this. Two friends agree that if one of them discovers something dangerous, they will immediately send a warning message. Days pass. No message comes. The other friend, feeling reassured by the silence, decides to proceed with their plans, trusting that no news means no danger. But here's the puzzle. The absence of the message itself delivers a powerful piece of information. It shapes decisions. It communicates. So the riddle asks, is silence a message? Or does a message require action, words, and intentional delivery? The paradox challenges our ideas about communication, intent, and meaning. In logic and philosophy, this touches on the concept of negative information, the knowledge gained not from what happens, but from what doesn't. We feel this riddle in everyday life, when waiting for a call that never comes, when the absence of a signal becomes a signal itself. So as your thoughts soften tonight, here's the gentle question to drift on. When nothing is said, can it still be heard? If a hotel has an infinite number of rooms, and all the rooms are full, can it still make space for new guests? This mind-bending riddle, known as Hilbert's Hotel Paradox, was proposed by the German mathematician David Hilbert. It's a thought experiment designed to explore the strange nature of infinity. Here's how it goes. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all currently occupied. A new guest arrives asking for a room. At first it seems impossible. There are no vacancies. But the manager has an idea. He asks the guest in room 1 to move to room 2, the guest in room 2 to move to room 3, and so on. Each guest moves to the next room, freeing up room 1 for the new arrival. The paradox doesn't stop there. What if an infinite number of new guests show up? The manager smiles and moves each current guest from room N to room 2N, doubling their room number. Now all the odd-numbered rooms are empty, providing infinite space for the newcomers. This paradox shows how infinity doesn't behave like finite numbers. In the world of infinity, adding more doesn't always mean running out of space. It's not just a playful riddle. It helps mathematicians think about infinite sets, cardinality, and the counterintuitive properties of infinite numbers. So as your mind slows tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. When there's always room for more, what does full even mean? If you erase the memory of an experience, did it still happen? For you. Here's the thought experiment. Imagine you undergo a profound experience. Maybe it's beautiful, maybe it's painful, but immediately after, your memory of it is completely erased. You retain no knowledge of it whatsoever. No feeling, no trace. Now the question. Did that experience still happen to you in any meaningful way? From the outside, others might confirm that it happened. It may have even left visible marks on your body, or changed the course of your life indirectly. But you, from your own perspective, would have no awareness of it. This paradox challenges how we define experience, self, and reality. Is an event only real for us if we remember it? Does memory give meaning to experience? Or does experience have value on its own, even if forgotten? The riddle also touches on questions about identity and continuity. If the memory of an experience is gone, are you the same person as the one who lived through it? It echoes deeper philosophical debates in ethics and psychology too. Should we be held accountable for actions we no longer remember? Is healing from trauma possible if the memory itself is removed? So as your mind softens into rest tonight, here's the quiet puzzle to hold. If the story is erased from your mind, did the story ever really belong to you? If you create a perfectly accurate map of the world, with every detail at full scale, is it still a map, or is it simply the world itself? This riddle, sometimes called the paradox of the map, was famously explored by writers like Lewis Carroll and philosophers like Alfred Korzybski, who coined the phrase, "The map is not the territory." Imagine a map so precise that it shows every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every inch exactly as it exists in the real world. To achieve this level of detail, the map must be as large as the territory it represents, 1 square mile on the map for every square mile of land. But if the map becomes identical to the land it maps, does it still function as a map? Maps are meant to simplify reality, to give us useful representations. They highlight certain features, ignore others. But the more perfect the map becomes, the less useful it is until it collapses into being the thing itself. This paradox invites reflection on the limits of representation, abstraction, and perception. How much detail is too much? When does describing something replace the thing being described? It also touches on everyday life. When does a plan become so complicated that it stops being useful? When does a model stop being a guide and become an obstacle? So as your thoughts drift tonight, here's the quiet question to hold. Is the truth best captured by perfect detail or by knowing what to leave out? If a prediction about your future is perfectly accurate, can you choose to act against it? This riddle dives into the tension between free will and determinism. Imagine a machine, an oracle, or a person capable of predicting exactly what you will do tomorrow. Let's say the prediction is, tomorrow you will drink tea at noon. You receive this prediction. Feeling defiant, you decide that, just to prove the oracle wrong, you will drink coffee instead. But here's the twist. If the prediction was truly perfect, then your very choice to rebel against it would have already been accounted for in the prediction. If it didn't predict your rebellion, it wasn't perfect after all. This paradox asks, is freedom of choice possible if the future is knowable? Or does the act of knowing the future lock the future into place? It challenges the idea that the future can be both open to choice and fully predictable at the same time. And it invites questions about self-fulfilling prophecies. Does knowing the outcome influence the outcome itself? So as your mind relaxes tonight, here's the quiet question to drift on. If the script of your life is written ahead of time, can you still be the author? If pressing a button destroys the button itself instantly, can the button never be pressed? Picture this. There is a red button on a pedestal. Written beneath it are the words, "Pressing this button will immediately destroy the button. If you reach out and press it, the button is destroyed the instant you press it." But here's the puzzle. If the button is destroyed the moment it is pressed, does your action count as pressing it? Or is the destruction so immediate that the pressing can never truly occur? If the destruction happens before the action completes, the button was never pressed. If the button was pressed, then it wasn't destroyed fast enough to stop you. This paradox challenges how we define action, cause, and completion. Does an action need time to exist? Can something be interrupted so fast that it never actually happened? It echoes broader questions in logic and philosophy. Can a process negate itself so instantly that the process never occurred at all? So as your mind softens into calm tonight, here's the quiet question to hold. If the consequence erases the action, did the action ever happen? If you flip a coin every day and you will die the first time it lands on tails, how long could you live? This paradox explores the strange relationship between probability, survival, and infinity. Here's how it works. Each day you flip a fair coin. If it lands heads, you live to flip again tomorrow. But if it lands tails, that's the end. The odds of surviving one day are 50%. The odds of surviving 2 days in a row are 25%. For 3 days, it's 12.5%, and so on. The chance is halved each time. But here's the paradoxical twist. There's always a non-zero chance, no matter how small, that the coin lands on heads forever. In theory, it's possible, however unlikely, that you could live forever because tails just never comes up. This thought experiment highlights the difference between something being possible and something being likely. It also touches on deeper philosophical questions about luck, risk, and the unpredictability of life. Some compare this riddle to the randomness of survival itself. In real life, we take risks every day, crossing streets, driving cars, simply aging. Yet any single day's chance of disaster may feel small. But over time, even small risks add up. So as your thoughts settle tonight, here's the quiet question to hold. If chance decides your fate each day, does the improbability of immortality make it any less possible? If 2 people know a secret, but one forgets it completely, is the secret still shared? Consider this. 2 friends share a secret. Perhaps it's a password, a memory, or a private piece of knowledge known only between them. One day, through memory loss or by choice, one of the friends forgets the secret entirely. The other still remembers it perfectly. Now the question, is the secret still shared, or does it become the possession of just one person the moment the other forgets? If sharing depends on active possession of knowledge, then perhaps the secret is no longer shared. But if sharing refers to the act of once having held it together, does the shared status remain, even if one mind lets go? This riddle isn't just about memory, it's about the meaning of relationships, trust, and mutual knowledge. It asks us to question whether shared experiences or information depend on present awareness, or if their shared nature persists through history alone. It also raises practical questions. Can you violate trust by revealing a secret to someone who doesn't even remember it? Does forgetting absolve responsibility for a shared promise? So as your thoughts drift softly tonight, here's the quiet reflection to hold. If no one remembers the bond, does the bond still exist? If an artist creates a masterpiece but never shows it to anyone, is it still art? Imagine an artist who spends a lifetime working in total isolation. Day after day, they create intricate paintings, breathtaking sculptures, and profound music. But none of these works are ever shared. No one sees the paintings, hears the music, or knows the sculptures exist. Now the question arises, are these works truly art, if they are never experienced by anyone but the Creator, or perhaps not even consciously remembered by the Creator at all? Some argue that art exists in the act of creation itself, independent of audience or recognition. Others claim that art requires communication, that its meaning only comes alive when it touches another person. The paradox touches on broader questions about expression, meaning, and purpose. Does value depend on being seen, heard, or known? Can meaning exist in complete isolation? It also echoes debates in philosophy about the tree falling in the forest. If no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? But here the focus is on whether creative intent alone is enough to bring art into being. So as your thoughts slow tonight, here's the soft reflection to hold. If no one knows the beauty exists, does the beauty still exist at all? If someone gives you a gift but tells you that using it will harm you, is it still a gift? Imagine a scenario where you receive a beautiful wrapped package. Inside is a powerful tool, a piece of knowledge, or perhaps an opportunity. But attached to the gift is a warning. If you use this, it will hurt you. This riddle asks, can something still be considered a gift if it carries guaranteed harm? In most cultures, a gift is understood as a token of goodwill, something meant to help please or benefit the recipient. But what happens when the nature of the gift includes its own destruction? This paradox stretches beyond hypothetical scenarios and touches on real-world issues. A technology that empowers, but also endangers. A secret that once known brings sorrow or fear. A legacy that inspires and burdens at the same time. It also raises questions about intent versus consequence. Does the giver's good intention make it a gift, regardless of the outcome? Or does the harm erase the generosity behind the gesture? So as your mind softens into rest tonight, here's the quiet puzzle to hold. When help comes wrapped in harm, is it truly help at all? If two people silently agree on something but never speak it aloud, is the agreement real? Picture this. Two people face a common problem. Without a word, each understands what the other will do. Neither says anything, yet both act according to this unspoken plan, and it works. But now consider, if nothing was spoken and no explicit signal was given, can this truly be called an agreement? Or is agreement only real when there is clear shared confirmation? This riddle touches on the fuzzy line between assumption, intention, and communication. Sometimes shared history, body language, or even eye contact can convey understanding. But does that make it a real agreement, or just lucky guessing? It also raises deeper questions about contracts, trust, and social connection. When does mutual expectation become a promise? Is acknowledgement required for responsibility? You might recognize this paradox in daily life, between friends who just know what the other wants, or in situations where assumptions replace actual words. So as your thoughts ease into quiet tonight, here's the soft puzzle to hold. If the promise was never spoken, was it ever truly made? If you only know the right way forward after taking the wrong turn, was the wrong turn actually wrong? Imagine you're walking through a dense forest with many paths. There are no signs, no map. At every fork you have to choose. Sometimes, the only way to find out which path leads to your destination is to take one and discover that it's a dead end. But here's the twist. Because you learned where not to go, you now know which path is correct. The so-called mistake gave you the very knowledge you needed. So was it truly a mistake? This paradox invites reflection on the nature of error, learning, and progress. Is a misstep still a misstep if it brings you closer to understanding? Can failure be considered part of the right path if it's the only way to discover what the right path is? It also touches on everyday life, in relationships, work, learning, and personal growth. Often the wrong decisions are the ones that teach us the most. So as your thoughts drift into quiet tonight, here's the gentle question to hold. When the wrong way leads to the right place, was it ever really wrong? If a superintelligent predictor has already predicted your choice, can you really choose freely? This is Newcomb's paradox, one of the most famous thought experiments in decision theory and game theory, proposed by physicist William Newcomb and made popular by philosopher Robert Nozick. Here's the setup. You're presented with two boxes. Box A, transparent, contains $1,000. Box B, opaque, may contain either $1,000 or nothing. A superintelligent being, known for its near-perfect accuracy in predicting human choices, has already predicted what you will do. If it predicted that you would take only box B, it put $1,000 in box B. If it predicted that you would take both boxes, it put nothing in box B. Now you stand before the boxes. You know the rules. The money is already placed. What should you do? The tension, the rational argument. Since the money is already in or not in box B, your choice can't change it. So take both boxes, more is always better. The prediction argument. But the being's predictions are so accurate that if you take both boxes, it probably predicted that, and box B is empty. If you take only box B, it probably predicted that too, and there's $1,000 inside. This paradox challenges our understanding of free will, prediction, causality, and rational decision-making. Are you really choosing freely, or is your choice determined by the prediction itself? So as your mind softens tonight, here's the puzzle to carry. If the future already knows your choice, is the choice still yours? If there are more people than spots on the lifeboat, who should be saved? This is often referred to as the lifeboat dilemma, and it's one of the most powerful ethical paradoxes in moral philosophy and utilitarian ethics, discussed by thinkers like Peter Singer. Here's the riddle. A shipwreck has occurred. There is one small lifeboat with limited capacity. Say it can hold only 10 people safely, but there are 20 survivors. Now the terrible question arises. Who gets on the boat? Do you choose randomly, giving everyone an equal chance? Save the youngest, who may have the longest future ahead. Prioritize those who are strongest and most likely to survive. Choose the most skilled, like doctors who might save others later. Or take first come, first served, rewarding luck, not merit. As you can see, there are many possible options to answer, but every option seems unfair in some way. But doing nothing and letting everyone die also feels unacceptable. The lifeboat dilemma forces us to confront questions about fairness, equality, utility, and moral responsibility. It asks, does the value of life change based on circumstances? Is it ever right to decide whose life matters more? It echoes modern real-world dilemmas in triage medicine, resource allocation, and disaster response. So as your thoughts rest tonight, here's the haunting question to hold. When saving everyone isn't possible, how do you decide who gets saved? If a being knows everything, can it truly understand what it feels like not to know? This is the classic omniscience paradox, a riddle about knowledge, experience, and the limits of understanding. The setup is simple. Imagine a being that is completely omniscient. It knows every fact, every detail, every outcome. There is nothing it does not know. No question unanswered. No mystery remaining. But now ask this, does that being also know what it feels like to be uncertain? Can it understand the experience of ignorance, the feeling of curiosity, of wondering, of learning something for the first time? The problem is this. If the being knows what it's like to not know, then it must in some way experience ignorance. But if it truly experiences ignorance, then there is something it does not know, at least for that moment. On the other hand, if the being does not understand what it feels like to be ignorant, then there is still something it lacks, the experience of not knowing. The paradox asks a deeper question about the difference between knowing facts and understanding experience. Can knowledge of a feeling replace the actual experience of it? Does true understanding require more than just knowing the information? It echoes similar questions in philosophy and consciousness studies. Can a machine understand human emotion without ever feeling it? Can anyone fully understand pain, joy, or love without having lived through it? So as your thoughts rest tonight, here's the final puzzle to hold. If knowing everything removes the need to learn, is something important lost along the way? Some questions are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried. Not every riddle needs a solution. Not every paradox demands an answer. Some exist simply to remind us of the quiet space between knowing and wondering. And perhaps that is the real gift of these puzzles. They do not rush you toward conclusion. They invite you to pause, to reflect, to drift. Because in the end, the mind doesn't always rest by finding answers. Sometimes it finds peace by asking better questions, by holding the mystery a little longer, by sitting gently with the unknown. Thank you for joining this journey into the unresolved and the beautiful. May these riddles stay with you, not as problems to solve, but as soft places for the mind to wander. Good night.